May 29th, 1943. Somewhere in the frozen fog of Alaska, a doctor sat down to write his final words. Not to his commanders, not to his country, to his wife, to his daughters, to the life he would never see again. He was 33 years old. He had studied medicine in California. He had proposed to his wife at Yosemite National Park. He had honeymooned on a Greyhound bus from Los Angeles to Niagara Falls. He loved American ice cream, American open roads, American skyscrapers. And now, on a barren rock at the edge of the world, he was about to die fighting against the country he had loved. His name was Paul Nobuo Tatsuguchi, and this is his diary.
Only 33 years of living, and I am to die here. I have no regrets. I am grateful that I have kept the peace in my soul which Christ bestowed upon me. Goodbye, Teiko, my beloved wife, who loved me to the last. Until we meet again. Godspeed. I feel sorry for you, Takiko, born February of this year and gone without seeing your father. Hisako, who just became 4 years old, will grow up unhindered. Be good. These were his last words, written in a cave, on an island most Americans have never heard of, in a battle your father's generation was told to forget.
This is the story of the Battle of Attu, the only World War II battle fought on American soil. The only time since the War of 1812 that enemy forces occupied United States territory, and one of the deadliest engagements in the entire Pacific War. Only the battle for Iwo Jima had a higher casualty rate. Yet most Americans have never heard of it. They call it the Forgotten Battle, the Lost Campaign, the 1,000-mile war nobody remembers. Your father might have known men who fought there, men who came home and never spoke of it, men who carried the frozen silence of that island for the rest of their lives. This story survives because one man wrote it down, a Japanese doctor with an American education, a Christian pacifist forced into war. His diary was recovered from his body, translated, passed from soldier to soldier across the Pacific, and it changed how Americans saw their enemy.
Before he was a soldier, Paul Tatsuguchi was a dreamer. Born in Hiroshima in 1911, he grew up in a Japan that was opening to the world. His family converted to Christianity when he was young, Seventh-day Adventists, believers in peace, in healing, in service to others. At 17, Paul left Japan for America. He enrolled at Pacific Union College in California's Napa Valley. A quiet young man who loved classical music, who wrote poetry, who wanted to become a doctor. In California, Paul discovered a different world. The open highways that stretched to the horizon, the towering buildings of San Francisco, the way Americans moved through the world with such confidence, such freedom. He fell in love with all of it. And then he fell in love with a woman.
Taeko Miyake had followed him from Japan. They had known each other since childhood. In the spring of 1938, Paul took her to Yosemite National Park. Standing beneath those ancient sequoias, he asked her to marry him. For their honeymoon, they did something no Japanese couple of their generation would have imagined. They bought Greyhound bus tickets, Los Angeles to Niagara Falls, across the entire continent. They stopped at every diner, every roadside attraction, every small town that would have them. Paul wrote to his family that he wanted to stay in America, to practice medicine there, to raise his children as Americans. But in 1939, his father fell ill. Paul and Taeko returned to Japan. Just for a visit, they told themselves. They never came back.
Japan in 1940 was not the country Paul had left. Militarism was rising. The emperor was divine. The West was the enemy. And Paul Tatsuguchi, with his American education and his Christian faith, was suspect. The military came for him in 1941, not as an officer. Despite his medical degree, despite his years of training, they gave him an enlisted rank. His American connections made him untrustworthy. He was assigned to the Northern Sea Detachment, sent to a place so remote, so strategically meaningless, that even the Japanese considered it punishment. A chain of volcanic islands stretching from Alaska toward Japan, the Aleutians, and one island in particular, Attu.
Attu is the westernmost point of North America, closer to Tokyo than to Washington. A treeless, wind-swept rock where the Bering Sea meets the Pacific Ocean. The weather there is among the worst on Earth. Horizontal rain that cuts like knives. Fog so thick soldiers got lost 10 feet from their tents. Winds that never stopped howling. The Aleut people had lived there for thousands of years. 42 of them remained when the Japanese arrived in June 1942. The Japanese took them prisoner, shipped them to labor camps in Japan. 16 would die before the war ended. Paul Tatsuguchi arrived on Attu on March 10, 1943. One of the last supply convoys to reach the island before the American blockade sealed it off completely. He set up a field hospital in a cave, 24 men under his care, 2,000 miles from home. He had never met his second daughter. Laura Mutsuko had been born in February, while he was already on his way to this frozen edge of the world. In his letters to Taeko, he wrote about the beauty of the mountains, the fish he caught, the aurora borealis dancing across the Arctic sky. He could not tell her he was preparing to die.
12,000 miles away, another man was preparing for the same battle. Dick Laird was everything Paul Tatsuguchi was not. Born dirt poor in the coal towns of Appalachia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Wherever the mines were hiring, the Lairds followed. Dick quit school young to work the shafts, married young, had 3 daughters by the time he was 25. The army was his way out, his escape from the darkness underground. In the military, Dick found something he had never known: structure, purpose, brothers who would die for him. He became a good soldier, then a great one. The kind of man officers noticed, the kind who stayed calm when others broke. By May 1943, Sergeant Dick Laird was aboard a transport ship in the North Pacific. Destination classified, mission classified. He had no idea he was sailing toward a man he would think about for the rest of his life.
The American plan was called Operation Land Crab. Retake Attu. Expel the Japanese from American soil. Restore national honor. Military planners estimated 3 days. 3 days to clear an island defended by 2,500 Japanese soldiers. It would take nearly 3 weeks, and it would cost more American lives proportionally than any Pacific battle except Iwo Jima. The 7th Infantry Division had trained for desert warfare.
North Africa, the sands of Egypt. Instead, they were sent to the Arctic, given summer uniforms for Arctic conditions, leather boots that froze solid, weapons that jammed in the cold. On May 11, 1943, 12,000 American soldiers landed on Attu. They expected resistance on the beaches, machine gun fire, artillery. Instead, they found silence and black volcanic mud that swallowed men to their waists. The Japanese were not on the beaches. They were in the mountains, watching, waiting.
Paul Tatsuguchi wrote his first diary entry on May 12, 1943. Carrier-based planes flew over. Fired at it. There is a low fog and the summit is clear. Air raids carried out frequently. Heard loud noises. It is naval gunfire. Prepared battle equipment. He recorded it all with clinical precision, the way a doctor takes notes on a patient. The patient was dying, and he knew it. The American advance stalled almost immediately. The ground was impossible. Tundra that looked solid but swallowed vehicles whole. Ravines that appeared from nowhere in the fog. Ridges that took hours to climb. And Japanese snipers who seemed to materialize from the mist itself. Dick Laird and the men of the 7th Division had never experienced anything like it. The darkness, the cold, the enemy they could hear but never see. Years later, Laird would tell an interviewer, "I had seen darkness in the depths of a coal mine, but I had never felt anything like the blackness of war on Attu at night." Men died of exposure before they ever saw combat. Frostbite claimed more casualties than Japanese bullets. Soldiers fought over scraps of food when supply planes couldn't find them through the fog. In his cave hospital, Paul Tatsuguchi worked without rest. May 13th, 15 patients came into the field hospital. May 14th, continuous flow of wounded took refuge in the trench in the daytime and took care of patients during the bombardment. About 60 wounded came to the field hospital. I had to care for all of them, all by myself, all through the night. All by himself. 60 wounded men in a cave under bombardment. This was the enemy. This was the man American soldiers were taught to hate, to fear, to kill without mercy. A doctor, alone, trying to save lives.
The battle raged for 18 days. The Japanese strategy was simple. Retreat to the high ground. Let the Americans exhaust themselves climbing, then counterattack. Every ridge was a new slaughter. Every valley a new trap. American commanders had underestimated everything. The terrain, the weather, the determination of the enemy. And the Japanese had underestimated nothing except their own supply.
Paul Tatsuguchi's diary entries grew shorter, more desperate. May 21 was strafed when amputating a patient's arm, first time since moving to Chichagof Harbor that I went into our air raid shelter. May 22, strafing killed one medical man. During the night, a mortar shell came awful close. May 23, stayed in Foxhole from 0300 in the morning to 1600. Day's ration, 1.5 pounds, nothing else. Officers and men alike in the frost, everybody looked around for food and stole everything they could find.
By late May, the Japanese position was hopeless. American naval guns had destroyed their artillery.
Airstrikes had cut off all resupply. The blockade meant no reinforcements would ever come. Colonel Yasuyo Yamazaki, the Japanese commander, had started the battle with 2,600 men. By May 28th, fewer than 1,000 remained. Yamasaki faced a choice: surrender or die. For a Japanese officer in 1943, there was no choice at all.
May 28, 1943. Paul Tatsuguchi wrote the entry that would haunt Americans who read it. The remaining rations are for only 2 days. Our artillery has been completely destroyed. Continuous cases of suicide. He heard that they gave 400 shots of morphine to the severely wounded and killed them. He recorded it as fact, the way a doctor would. 400 men, given lethal injections by their own comrades, because surrender was not an option, because the code of Bushido demanded death before dishonor. And then Paul wrote something else. Half-fried thistle. It is the first time I have eaten something fresh in 6 months. It is a delicacy. In the midst of mass death, he noted the taste of a weed. The human mind protects itself in strange ways.
That night, Colonel Yamasaki gathered his surviving officers. The plan was audacious, suicidal, and utterly Japanese. 1,000 men would charge the American lines before dawn. They would overrun the artillery positions on Engineer Hill, capture the guns, turn them on the enemy. It was not a plan for victory. It was a plan for an honorable death. The Banzai charge.
May 29th, 1943. Paul Tatsuguchi's final entry. Today at 2 o'clock we assembled in front of headquarters. The field hospital took part 2. The last assault is to be carried out. All the patients in the hospital were to commit suicide. Only 33 years of living, and I am to die here. I have no regrets. I am grateful that I have kept the peace in my soul which Christ bestowed upon me. At 1800, took care of all the patients with grenades. Took care of. 3 words that contained an ocean of horror. The Christian pacifist, the healer, the man who had sworn to do no harm. He had been ordered to kill his own patients, and he had obeyed. Or perhaps he had given them the grenades. Let them choose their own deaths. We will never know exactly what happened in that cave. What we know is what he wrote next.
Goodbye, Taeko, my beloved wife, who loved me to the last. Until we meet again, Godspeed. I feel sorry for you, Takiko, born February of this year, and gone without seeing your father. Laura. He was writing to Laura, the daughter whose name he had Americanized in his diary, the baby girl he had never held. Hisako, who just became 4 years old, will grow up unhindered. Be good. The number participating in the attack is a little over 1,000 to take enemy artillery positions. It seems the enemy is expecting an all-out attack tomorrow. He closed the diary. He picked up his Bible and he walked out of the cave to join the charge.
The attack came at 3:30 in the morning. 1,000 Japanese soldiers, many armed only with bayonets, poured through the fog toward the American lines. They were screaming, some in Japanese, some in broken English learned from American movies. They overran the first positions, then the second. Japanese soldiers reached areas so deep in American territory that they encountered rear echelon units, cooks, clerks, men who had never expected to fight. The Battle of Attu became hand-to-hand combat, bayonets and rifle butts, men killing each other in the fog with anything they could find.
Dick Laird was asleep in his tent when the screaming started. His first sergeant burst in. "Get up! They've broken through!" Laird grabbed his rifle, ran toward the sound of fighting. In the fog, he couldn't tell friend from enemy. A man ran into his tent. Laird shot him. Only then did he realize the man was American. Then he saw shapes moving through the mist. 8 Japanese soldiers coming straight for him. Laird pulled 2 grenades, threw them, opened fire. When the fog cleared, all 8 men were dead. One of them was Paul Nobuo Tatsuguchi.
Dick Laird searched the bodies, looking for intelligence documents, maps, codes, anything useful. In the pocket of one dead soldier, he found a small leather book, Japanese characters he couldn't read, and an address book with American names, American addresses, California, Loma Linda, places Laird had never heard of. He turned the book over to intelligence, didn't think much more about it. Within days, the diary was translated, and copies began spreading through the American ranks like wildfire.
The soldiers who read that diary were stunned. Here was an enemy they had been taught to hate, to see as subhuman, fanatics, animals. And instead, they found a man who loved his wife, who missed his children, who quoted Christ and found beauty in a weed. A man who had lived in America, who had driven its highways and eaten in its diners, who had wanted to stay. One soldier later wrote, "We'd been taught we were killing savages, but that diary showed he was a man full of heart and humanity. It made some of us think twice about who the enemy truly was." The Banzai charge ended on Engineer Hill. By dawn, it was over. The Japanese had been stopped, but at terrible cost. Of the more than 1,000 Japanese who charged that morning, fewer than 30 survived. Most had been killed in combat. Hundreds more committed suicide rather than surrender. They pressed grenades to their chests, shot themselves, threw themselves on American bayonets. American burial teams counted 2,351 Japanese bodies. They estimated hundreds more had been buried by bombardment during the battle. Only 28 Japanese soldiers were taken prisoner. None of them were officers. The Americans lost 549 killed, more than 1,100 wounded, another 2,000 casualties from frostbite, trench foot, and exposure. For a battle most Americans have never heard of. The Battle of Attu ended on May 30, 1943. American soil was American again. But for the men who fought there, nothing would ever be the same. Dick Laird came home with a Silver Star, the military's 3rd highest decoration for valor. He had killed 8 enemy soldiers single-handedly, a hero. He never felt like one.
For 40 years, Dick Laird carried Attu with him. The fog, the screaming, the bodies in the mist. And something else, something he couldn't explain. That diary, those American addresses, the man who had loved the country Laird was fighting for. He had killed a father, a husband, a doctor. A man Laird came to believe who shouldn't have been there, who didn't belong in that battle any more than Laird himself. The nightmares never stopped. He called them daymares, memories that ambushed him in broad daylight. The faces, the screaming, the fog that never lifted.
In Japan, Taeko Tatsuguchi received the news in August 1943. Her husband was dead, killed on an island she had never heard of, fighting for a cause he had never believed in. The military gave her a small widow's pension, a lock of Paul's hair that had been sent home before the battle, and nothing else. She raised their 2 daughters alone, Hisako, who remembered her father, and Laura, who never knew him at all. After the war, Taeko moved to California, to the place Paul had loved, to the country that had shaped him. Laura grew up American, speaking English, knowing almost nothing about the father who had died before she could form a single memory.
In 1983, Dick Laird read a newspaper article about the Battle of Attu. It mentioned a Japanese doctor who had tried to surrender, shouting, "Don't shoot, I'm a Christian." It claimed he had been shot anyway. Laird knew that wasn't true. He had been there. He knew exactly what had happened. Something compelled him to act. After 40 years of silence, 40 years of nightmares, he needed to find the family of the man he had killed. He searched, made phone calls, tracked down records, and he found her, Laura Tatsuguchi Davis, living in Sherman Oaks, California, the daughter Paul had never met. In the spring of 1984, a white-haired man knocked on Laura's door. He was nervous, awkward. He said he had known her father in the war. Laura invited him in. They talked. He seemed haunted by something. She couldn't figure out what. As he left, he turned back, looked over his shoulder. "By the way," he said, "I'm the one who killed your father." Then he got in his car and drove away. Laura stood in her doorway in a daze. The father she had never known, killed by the man who had just sat in her living room.
It took 13 years for Laura to process what had happened. 13 years before she was ready to face Dick Laird again, to hear the full story, to understand why he had come. In 1997, she visited him at an assisted living facility in Arizona, an old man now, still haunted, still carrying Attu. He told her everything. The fog, the charge, the 8 bodies in the mist, the diary he had found. He told her about the nightmares, the faces, the guilt that never faded. And then Laura understood. He hadn't come to confess. He had come for forgiveness.
Laura Tatsuguchi Davis wrote Dick Laird a letter. "I am writing to express my gratitude for coming to my home so many years ago, and to ask you to let go of any feelings of guilt or pain
you still have over what happened between you and my father at Attu. What happened there was neither your fault nor his. Neither of you nor any of your comrades chose that particular battle or that particular time to fight. None of you should have been there. But you were. And that fact cast upon you terrible duties. Duties you discharged the only way you could. What happened, happened. You were not at fault. Laird read the letter and wept. He told Laura it was the first time in decades he had slept without nightmares.
Dick Laird and Laura Tatsuguchi Davis became friends. They met often in Tucson, where Laura's son attended school and Laird had retired. An American soldier and the daughter of the man he killed, bound together by a battle on a frozen rock at the edge of the world. Laird died in 2005. At peace, Laura believes. Finally at peace.
Your father's generation was taught to hate the enemy, to see them as less than human. It was the only way to fight, the only way to survive. But some of them knew better. Some of them read that diary as it passed from hand to hand across the Pacific. Some of them saw in Paul Tatsuguchi not a monster, but a man, a father, a husband, a believer. Maybe your father was one of them. Maybe he carried that knowledge home. Maybe that's why he never talked about the war. Because the truth was more complicated than hatred. Because the enemy was human too.
Paul Tatsuguchi's Bible was recovered from Jarman Pass on Attu. Another American veteran, Alvin Cope, kept it for 50 years before returning it to Laura. Inside the front cover, Paul had written his favorite verse, Deuteronomy 30:19. Therefore, choose life. The Bible is now housed at the Japanese-American National Museum in Los Angeles. The diary is preserved in military archives, and on Engineer Hill on Attu, a titanium peace memorial stands where 1,000 men charged to their deaths.
This story survives because Paul Tatsuguchi wrote it down in a cave under bombardment, knowing he was about to die. He wrote to preserve something. His thoughts, his faith, his love for a wife and daughters he would never see again. And in doing so, he preserved something else. His humanity. The enemy was human. The enemy loved his family. The enemy prayed to the same God. Your father knew this, even if he could never say it. Now you know it too.
Foxhole Chronicles, preserving the forgotten voices of World War II. Every uniform had a name. Every name had a story. These men are leaving us. Their stories must not die with them.